The education sector across Australia and New Zealand is in crisis. Even in some international schools across Asia, we're seeing the same issue. There are teacher retention issues, there are teacher shortages, massive teacher shortages. Now, one of the reasons that's been cited is workplace bullying. There are teachers leaving because they are bullied in their workplaces, they don't want to stay anymore, and this is a massive issue that needs to be addressed. So if you're a leader in a school and you are dealing with allegations of workplace bullying, they have to be investigated thoroughly. But one of the big questions that you've got to ask, one of the first questions you have to ask, is whether or not you're going to handle it in-house or whether you're going to engage an external independent investigator. Now, in this video, I'm going to give you 3 factors to consider when you're making that decision, because it is a difficult decision. I understand that. I'm a former detective sergeant with the New Zealand Police with a background in teaching, and now I work specifically in the education sector, helping people like you conduct investigations that are effective, that are efficient, and that are ethical and legally compliant. Now, in many cases, you will be able to handle an investigation like this in-house. That is possible. And if you've got questions about how to do that, drop them in the comments below and I'll point you in the right direction. But ultimately, there are going to be certain situations where you're going to need to engage someone external like me, an independent investigator. But how do you know? What are the factors you need to consider? Where do you draw the line? At what point do you need to go external? I'm going to give you 3 factors. The first is time. Workplace investigations need to be conducted quickly. You've got staff, if you've got staff stood down for a serious matter, they might be stood down on full pay, so there's some financial implications there, but there's also a really big question around staff well-being. For the staff who aren't being investigated, it brings a whole lot of uncertainty in their workplace, can have a really serious effect on staff morale and productivity. But think as well about the staff who are actually in the middle of the investigation, the complainant, the respondent. For them to have these sorts of allegations hanging over their heads, these sorts of question marks over them, can cause a huge amount of stress. Now, I think there's a moral imperative, if you are an employer, to look after your staff and to make sure these issues are dealt with swiftly. But there is now also an increased awareness of the importance of psychosocial safety in the workplace staff. So if you're going to delay and allow these things to take a long period of time, you're opening yourself up to risk there. So the question you need to ask yourself is whether or not you have the time to conduct a thorough investigation. You're going to have to plan the investigation, you're going to have to review all the documentation thoroughly, so there could be emails, there could be text messages, there could be other evidence like CCTV footage that you're going to have to pore through. Then you're going to have to interview everyone involved, you're going to have to then have those interviews either transcribed or summarised, then analyse all that evidence, and then write a good detailed investigation report that you can then forward through to whoever the decision maker is going to be at the end of the process. Now, just as a bit of a guide for you, if I'm asked, if you ask me to conduct an independent investigation for you, I will generally allow, on average, about 5 hours per investigative interview. Okay, so that's for conducting the interview itself, plus the transcribing of the interview or the summarising of the interview. Now, some don't take anywhere near that long. Some will only take an hour or so from start to finish, but some can take a lot longer as well. If it's a particularly complex or sensitive issue, the interview itself could take 2 or 3 hours, and then you've got the transcribing of that interview as well on top of that, depending on how serious the allegations are. So that's your rule of thumb. And the question that you need to ask is whether or not you have that much time to dedicate to it. Do you have this much time? I suspect that for many of you, you probably do not. I spend a lot of my time working with leaders in the education sector, and I know that you're busy. You don't have a whole lot of time. You're not sitting around waiting for work to come in. And now, an independent investigator like me, we can dedicate all our resources to your particular situation and get the investigation completed far quicker than what you ever will, which ultimately can be better for your staff and better for the reputation of your school. The second factor is skills. Do you have the skills required to carry out the investigation to a high enough standard? Now, workplace investigations are coming under increased scrutiny. This is no longer a job for an amateur enthusiast. It requires someone who's got experience, expertise, the skills and knowledge required to do a thorough investigation for you. Now, if you've made it to the point where you are a decision maker in these matters, it is probably because you are a very good teacher, you're a very good educator, and you probably have a lot of administrative skills as well. And I applaud you for that. But have you actually had any specific training in how to conduct an investigation? I doubt it, because it's not part of your initial teacher training, and there's minimal support and professional development offered in this space for the education sector. Now, I understand why you might want to keep it in-house, and as I said, there are situations where you can. Obviously, there are some advantages to that. You are a leader. I know that you feel a responsibility to get these issues sorted for your team, for your community. You want to lead, but don't fall into the trap of thinking that just because you're an excellent teacher or administrator, that also means you're going to be an excellent investigator. It's a different skill set, and it might be time to outsource it. And I would actually argue that deciding to engage an external investigator, being able to make that sort of difficult decision, is actually a sign of strong leadership from you. And the third factor is bias. Now, this is a big one, because even if you do have the time, even if you do get the process right, even if you are a trained investigator and you do handle it in-house, you do a good job of investigating it, the whole process can easily be derailed if you are seen to have had a bias or a conflict of interest. So maybe that there is a bias or there is a conflict of interest, but it may even be simply that you are perceived to have a bias or a conflict of interest in the matter. That can completely derail the whole process, no matter how good it is, and open it up to be challenged. Now, the principles of natural justice or due process, which should be underpinning all these investigations, they make it very clear that you need to be impartial and you need to be unbiased, you need to be objective, and you have to be able to provide evidence or demonstrate that you've been unbiased and objective in your investigation process. Now, this is where someone like me as an independent investigator actually adds, I think, potentially the most value, because we just take it completely off your hands. We eliminate that as even being a possibility. We bring transparency to the process. You can just say, look, we've outsourced it to someone completely independent who doesn't have an interest in that. So there you have three factors to consider when deciding whether to engage an independent investigator. Do you have the time? Do you have the skills necessary to conduct a sufficiently thorough investigation? And do you have the ability to remain completely unbiased and objective, and to appear unbiased and objective? Now, if you found this useful, really appreciate it if you like and subscribe. And if you're looking for an independent investigator, someone who specialises in the education sector with more than 10 years of investigation experience across both criminal and now the civil sector as well, reach out. I can conduct investigations for you either in person or remotely. Now, I know that these decisions are tough, but hopefully this video has given you some more confidence in making those decisions. The very fact that you have watched this far in the video shows me that you care about your staff, you care about them being treated fairly. So keep up your wonderful work.